Welcome to Conversations. I am Bammy.
And this is KyMichele. We've got a great topic to discuss today, so you guys just sit back, relax, and listen in to our conversation.
Let's go.
And thank you for joining us today. I am KyMichele.
And I am Bammy. Thank you for joining us today at the Conversation Desk. We have a great topic today that we would like to talk about.
Yeah, and that topic is?
The topic is money and the church.
Oh, my.
Yeah, I know. There's probably a lot of oh my's going on right now.
Oh, my.
As people listening to this particular episode. I'm looking forward to it. Funny enough, we obviously clearly needed to have this conversation today. There's a couple of different things that have happened over the course of the day that's led us to want to have this conversation right away. And we're looking forward to having you all join us. So,
yes, let's get into it.
What are you thinking about money in the church?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is talk about money as it is seen by believers in the Bible and, in churches. We're typically talking about tithing and offering, tithes and offerings. The tithe is typically stated as 10% of your income, and offering would be considered anything that you give beyond that 10%. I should say also, typically the tithe is typically reserved for, quote unquote, the local church. And so offerings also could be to any other, ministry, organization, church that isn't your local church, where you just, give them an offering versus the 10% of your income.
Right. So typically the expectation is that your tithe will go to wherever you call your home church.
Right.
And then the offering is anything beyond that. So interestingly enough, the part of the foundation for this was I was given my tithe and offering today when I had a thought about this particular topic, and reached out to KyMichele, and we decided to talk about it. So I think did you want to define?
Well, let's back up, because it wasn't that you reached out. It just so happened that I had read an article that I sent to you.
Right.
About money in the church.
Let's clarify that, yeah.
And so we decided that we needed to talk about it.
Clearly need to have this conversation right away. Yeah. So.
Go for it.
So I will say, for me, what I've observed is it is an uncomfortable conversation for a lot of ministers that I have served under. I've actually had ministers who have refused to talk about tithing and offering.
Okay.
It is such an uncomfortable thing for them, and for different reasons. But I think at the bottom of most of it is there is a sense of, am I begging from money from people, right?
Okay.
Their hard-earned money. And so I think that makes a lot of ministers uncomfortable in having that conversation. Now, the flip side of it is there are some ministers who that's primarily what they talk about. I mean, sometimes they have 3 different offerings in one service, right? And they spend quite a bit of time on it, and they're very comfortable talking about it. Their ministry is a ministry that they will tell you is about blessings, and you can't get blessed if you're not tithing and giving offerings. So I've seen both extremes of it. I do think the body of Christ is struggling to find that right point in the middle to have a healthy conversation about tithes and offerings.
Okay, and you think that is why?
I think part of it is because a lot of ministers do feel like they're begging. I think that's why some don't talk about it. And then the others who always talk about it is, their ministry is, they call it a prosperity ministry, a prosperity gospel, sorry. And it's about, the foundation of it is tithing and offering. And that's all they talk about. So it's 2 extremes of it. I personally feel like the church is coming at it from the wrong angle. I think when you talk about giving your heart to God, I think that's the approach that the church should be taking. That's my thought. Ordained minister, but that's my thought. For starters.
Okay. I will come with what I believe is the biblical view. There are arguments that the term tithe is not mentioned in the New Testament, but it kind of is, and it's implied, especially when, they're talking about the Pharisees and how they tithe even, like the spices and things that they have.
Right.
And so I believe that even in the New Testament, it talks about tithes and offerings. And I do believe we should give to God. I think the challenge for a lot of people, you're coming from the standpoint of how it's being taught, and I think I see it also from the standpoint of how it's being received. And I think some people don't want to part with their money, so they're always going to, have a problem with it.
Of
There's
course.
that. There are people who have been hurt in the church surrounding or disappointed. I have a family member who was disappointed, and I may get into that later on. And then you also have those who genuinely want to give, however, they do not believe that it has to be the 10%.
Right.
They just believe in just giving offerings. And so there's a whole lot about that.
Here's my quick thought on that. As you talk about people wanting to give but struggling with the idea of giving 10%.
Mm-hmm.
As a Christian, my question to you would be, do you believe that everything you own was given to you by God? Now, if your answer is yes, then my response would be, is giving 10% back to God too much?
If you haven't been taught it, if you haven't gotten to an understanding of it, and especially if you have been hurt in the church behind it, I think it makes it difficult. And I will give an example. I have a family member who was kind of being groomed to be a part of leadership, and when it came to the tithing part, some of the leaders came and said, okay, well, you can put in, a big amount, like, $50 or whatever the case may be in front of everybody. But when we take it back to count, we can just give you your 50 back or whatever it is you want to give. And that's how they did it to get the offerings up. That messed my family member up.
Wow.
So when you see it from that perspective,
sure,
it's kind of going to make you not want to not only not tithe, but think that all of everything that people do in the churches, it all operates like that when you encounter things like that, especially if you weren't taught any differently to see that, no, that doesn't necessarily always happen all the time.
Right. And I get that, because I also know people who encountered different teachings on giving. I know certain ministers who actually preach that your entire first month salary for the year,
the entire year, should go to God.
Belongs to God. And naturally, people who are
the first fruit.
First fruit. Right. Mm-hmm. People who are basically going check to check, how are they supposed to afford giving their entire first month check to the church?
Okay, so let me speak on that.
Okay.
Just for a quick minute. Giving any tithes and offerings, anything more than that occasional $1 or $5 that, some people do, to give a true 10%, or even giving a first fruits offering or a special offering, whatever, it has to do with faith. And the faith that you have to have that God is going to meet your need. I mean, that I've heard it said multiple times, and I personally, especially when it comes to special type offerings, I have had to have the faith that God is going to provide. So,
yeah.
It's a faith issue. Everything that we go through, to me, is you're being stretched in your faith. You're being molded, and you gotta work on your faith.
Yeah.
If your faith is never challenged, you can't grow.
Yeah, I believe your faith needs to be challenged in the church. I believe that wholeheartedly. I just question sometimes the approach, especially when it comes to money. I question the approach, just like you said with your family member who have the situation where, they're kind of like, hey, do this in front of everybody, and then when we get in the back, I think that's the biggest issue. Before you start talking about people's faith, I think there's a disconnect between their faith in growing their faith and what they're seeing is being done with.
I agree, because let's talk just for a quick moment about the perceptions of the church in media. And when I say perceptions in media, I'm saying we have all of these shows that are out now, these, dramas or what have you about the church, and I can't even think of any of them off the top of my head, and maybe that's good. But, and you see things on these shows, scandalous things happening, and a lot of it surrounds money. The pastor is pilfering the money to do this, that, or the other, or they're telling the congregation they're raising money for one thing and it's another, and people identify with these going on,
right,
when they see it on the show.
And I think that's a huge challenge. So when you start talking about people's faith needing to be stretched, I don't know how you get people to detach from those images, those mental blockages as far as what is being done. Now, in the grand scheme of things, when I have conversations with my friends about this, I always, for me, when I give, I'm giving, and I don't really say, hey, I wonder what you're doing with the money. But let me qualify that. That is also because the churches that I've been a part of have been churches who, for the most part, have been incredibly transparent, right? We have business meetings where they show the church's books and you're able to ask questions. So maybe that's why I have that perspective, right? Because I've been in environments, for the most part, where they are responsible with the monies that do come into the church. Let me back a little bit.
Okay. No, but let me, I feel you on that. I understand that. And if you are in a church that's transparent, sure, it's a whole lot easier. I was a part of a church once where the pastor was not very honest with what he was doing with the money. So much so, some of the leaders and such did not know that he was taking money out of the bank. I mean, his money was on it, on the account as the founding pastor or whatever, and the leaders did not know that he was taking out the money. So in that particular situation, there were some things that were done to try and ensure that he did not do that anymore.
Okay.
I don't recall anyone in leadership necessarily. I mean, I could be wrong. I mean, this was like a very long time ago. I don't recall anyone saying that they would not give anymore just in case he got access to the account again. And I wasn't thinking that either.
Wait, but just because you weren't aware doesn't mean that people actually didn't come to that conclusion. That's
true. What I'm saying is I don't know. Yeah. Okay.
But
I get it. I get it. I get it.
Because here's the thing. I mean, I've seen churches where they replace the pastor's Range Rover every other year. Is that really necessary when you and you're preaching tithing and people need to be faithful with their 10% and whatnot? Now, don't get me wrong. If out of the pastor's annual salary he wants to do that, hey, by all means, knock yourself out. Well. Here's the thing. I believe in modesty, but I don't think that is. If he wants to do that, that's on him. But what I'm talking about right now is the church's money.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I have to bring up the scripture in Timothy that says elders who lead effectively are worth double honor.
I agree.
So if there is an agreement to do that for the pastor because they believe that he is or she is leading effectively, so be it.
No, I got a problem with that.
I don't. We got together at, a church, and we got our pastor for an anniversary a new car.
I don't have a problem with a once in a while type deal. I'm talking about a situation where we're talking about every other year, every 2 years.
Okay. So who's to say that it wasn't leased and they're just doing a lease on something else and it's the same amount of money?
Like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. My question to you is, as a body of Christ, as a church, is that the most responsible way to handle the church's money where people listen, you can't just ask people to give. Yes, it's right. It is beneficial for them to give. It shows where their heart is, but the way you handle those funds is just as important.
I understand that. And guess what? For me, the way I have been able to deal with some of the things that I have seen over the years, that is between that man of God and God.
I understand that. But what I'm saying to you is we are talking about the body of Christ where there's baby Christians, there's people who's just trying to grow their faith. There are people who've maybe known God for a while, have grown, and have seen all kinds of things in the church and maybe left the church and now they're coming back. There's so many different types of people. You have a huge platform. Every little thing you do matters.
It does. And the Bible says that teachers, preachers, etc., will be counted double for their deeds. So those that hold those positions are going to get basically double judgment from God.
Yes, but what I'm saying, and I understand, totally agree. My point, again, is here we are on earth right now. It is important.
I get it. I get it. No, I get what you're saying. What I'm trying to say is, as an individual, I believe we need to get and work on our relationship with God to the point where we're able to go past these things. If you're not giving to your local church, give somewhere.
I agree.
Give somewhere. If you have such a big problem with what you're seeing is going on with your local church, maybe you need to be going somewhere else.
Well, that's a topic for a whole nother day, right?
I mean, sure, but the way I see it is, you said you haven't had a problem because you've seen transparency. So you haven't had a problem. That has not always been my experience. And
except for the most part, by the way.
Okay. The one thing that our listeners hopefully will be able to see with my perception sometimes in what I say about things is that I have, since I was in my 20s, I have held a leadership position in some capacity at every church that I've been in since my 20s, sometimes on staff, but always in some sort of leadership type of position. So some of the things that I say is based on my experience from that point of view. So with that said, what I'm saying is sometimes we need to take responsibility for where we go and what we do.
That's fair.
So if you don't see transparency, leave. Go. Or if you don't feel led to leave that particular place, you need to be praying to God about what you're supposed to be doing with some of the things that he's asking you to do. Full transparency with me right now and where I am with my walk. I am not a part of a local body of church presently, okay? There is a church that I attend. I am not a member, and that's just what it is right now. I have, for the time being, I take my tithes and offerings, and I have them in a totally different account, okay? And so it's kind of just being saved up, if you will, for when I believe the Lord shows me where I'm supposed to go or where I'm supposed to give. But I'm still taking it out of my account. I'm still taking it out of my income, rather. So that's full transparency on my end. This is not my first time doing that. Whenever I have been, quote unquote, in between being at a specific location of worship, I have always just decided, okay, I'm just going to put this to the side for now until God brings me to where he wants me to be.
Yeah, and what I was getting ready to say is I've had conversations with different friends who've actually made the comment they're a part of a church, but they won't give, well, when I say a part of a church, maybe they're not necessarily members, but they regularly attend, and they don't feel the need to give to that church. So what they do is they find missionaries or they find people in need, and give that 10% or, whatever the additional offering is, they give to those places. You're the theologian amongst us. Maybe you can...
I would not call myself a theologian.
Maybe you can speak to that, but, it's hard for me to argue that case. What I will say, kind of dialing back to where this started for me today was as I gave my tithe and offering to my local church, was understanding that, wow, there is not a more important time to make sure that I am faithful in giving my tithe and my offering to my local church, because guess what? They have people on staff at that local church that do things to make sure that the service and the church is operating the way it should. They rely on the income of the church to be able to survive. The church is out doing some additional missionary type work during this whole COVID situation. Those resources are needed to get. So again, it's hard for me to say to this person that, hey, you need to be given to your local church, because they're like, hey, maybe I don't trust the way they're handling the funds out there. Now, again, you can say, hey, that's not for you to worry about, right? Your responsibility is to give and let God handle the rest of it. But I have a hard time arguing that conversation, because they're still giving, right? And they're still committed to giving that 10%. And even the whole idea of the 10%, I know sometimes that even gets controversial in itself, but they're committed to that. Is there anything wrong with that? I have a hard time arguing that.
When you, and I have to admit, I have never, ever done a full in-depth study on tithe and offering. I've done studies, but to say that it's been exhaustive, I wouldn't be telling the truth. But what I can say, just from thoughts that I'm having right now, I think of how many times Paul went and asked the churches to give to other churches and raise offerings and things of that nature. I don't think that in any of that has it ever been clear if these are extra offerings, if some people just did their tithe. I think times in the early church were just set up differently than we have it right now.
Sure.
So some of what we have set up right now stems back from early Catholicism. I'm not going to get into all of the history of that.
Right.
However, I believe that the thought of kind of giving to your local church probably somewhat stemmed from that. You gave to your local church, and then they in turn gave it to the Vatican. Okay? So I think that's kind of where that came through, and that's tradition.
Right.
I do believe, that you should support where you are being fed. I believe that. If you are being fed at a place of worship, I believe you should give to that place of worship. I don't believe that you should be locked into only giving to that place of worship. And there have been times when I have felt led by God to give a certain amount to my local church and a certain amount somewhere else. And so I really depend on being led sometimes on where to give. So that's where I stand with it.
Yeah, but I mean, you're a woman who's been serving God for a while. I'm trying to look at this for people who are new in the faith, people maybe who are not in the faith, who are trying to understand the faith. And
there was a time when I didn't understand. There was a time when I was new to the faith. And when I first learned about tithe and offering, because I was at a point where I truly had surrendered to God, and I have to be very careful. I had surrendered to God. I wanted to serve God. That's where I was. I found out about tithing, and I was like, oh my goodness, I need to do this. And really from the very beginning, I was committed to giving to God, knowing that He uses people, ministries, churches to, use the funds for His purposes.
Okay.
And so I guess I was taught that early on. Yes, there may be some who are getting erroneous teaching. What I would suggest is to do a search. Don't go online searching for this stuff. Search from the Bible. You can go online to maybe find out where some scriptures are, but get the scriptures from the Bible.
Yeah, so Again, for me, when we started this conversation, I think where the church is really struggling is really teaching giving your heart to God. I think that's the foundation.
Yeah.
I think if the church spent more time talking about that, I think you would find that you have less of a need to spend so much time talking about giving an offering. People will willingly give if their hearts are being tugged on
right.
God.
And I will say there are churches who get it right.
Sure.
Kirk Whalum, the saxophonist Kirk Whalum, his father was a pastor. May he rest in peace. He has passed on. His church was at a point with how he taught and everything where, they just had offering slots at the back of the room in the sanctuary or wherever it was placed at within the church building, and he didn't raise an offering during services.
Yeah.
He did. So there are some who, and they did not have any problems meeting any of the needs that they had to. They gave, but they were taught that.
Right.
And so, yes, a lot has to do with how we are taught. But once again, and we'll probably say this in every podcast, we need to take responsibility ourselves to learn about it. One of the things that we're taught, I was taught early on, is to buy a concordance. A concordance has a list of words in the Bible, and then it lists all of the scriptures that has that particular word. So you look up money, you look up tithe, you look up offering, and you go through and you look at these scriptures and learn about it for yourself. Yes, I am fully aware not everybody is going to do this. I am aware. However, if you really want to know, that is, in my opinion, the best way to know and learn about tithe and offering. So that's my spiel.
In the grand scheme of things, when ministers are able to address this within the body that they serve, I think it goes a longer way. What they're able to do at that point is even give guidance as far as, hey, go look at this in the Bible, or, pray to God this way to get an understanding for how and why you should give. I'm telling you, this morning, it just hit me so hard. I was like, wow, with everything we're going through right now, with people losing jobs and on and on, even churches now are having to consider, do they let employees go? I was talking to a friend of mine who was a minister, and that was something that came up, that they might have to let some people go because their offerings, their income has gone down significantly during this whole COVID situation. So that
is a whole nother conversation on money, because my question then would be, how has that particular church body been responsible with previous giving offerings and such that they have gotten to that point within about a month's time?
Well, I mean, so it could vary, right? There could be a host of reasons why that's the situation. It could be a small church that's just...
Yeah, that's true. That's just existing and just trying to survive.
Right.
Yeah,
there are some churches that are set up where they only keep a certain, just like you said in the beginning, they only keep a certain portion of their tithes and offering. Another piece of it, a huge chunk of it, goes to an organizational top branch, whatever you want to call it. So there is that situation as well. So there's a host of reasons why they might not be able to support staff long term. I've been a part of churches where they do let people go because they're having to adjust their budget, because they budgeted for maybe $1 million last year.
I get it. And
right.
Once again, I still would just question, was it wise to... I don't want to get into all of that.
And this is why I think transparency is so important. You can't just leave it to the individuals and say, hey, it's your responsibility. Give and let God sort out what they're doing with the money. It's not either or. It's both, right? There's a responsibility for us as individuals to trust that we're giving and that the monies that we're giving will be used the right way. But then there's also huge responsibility for ministers and churches to be transparent. Because here's the thing. In your transparency, it helps my faith. It helps my faith seeing that you're transparent. Not only are you transparent, but you're responsible. Now, that also helps my faith in knowing that, oh, wow, here's what I'm supposed to do with money. Here's how I'm supposed to handle my money. What's left for me, looking at you as a church, how you deal with that. I think that's just as important in this entire conversation.
I get it, and I think it's really popular these days to rely on financial gurus to help us with our money, this, that, and the other.
Right.
Quite honestly, you can't trust a whole lot of that either. I think what it really boils down to is the heart of the individual towards God, and then also that particular church body, wherever they're being fed, being able to teach in such a way that their congregants understand and they're able to address it. Because I think the one thing you and I agree on is that, yes, we should give. And yes, the church bodies need to be responsible with the money. But I don't see all of this changing anytime soon, simply because it is such a controversial topic with so many different interpretations coming from the Bible. I just don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly it's, again, as we started this conversation, I told you my experience has been that a lot of pastors don't even want to touch this subject. They touch it reluctantly because for some of the reasons that I mentioned. And then there are some pastors that's all they talk about. And that's why I think it's such a hot topic in churches. And here's the thing that churches need to realize is there are people who are unchurched who are watching.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, it's
what do you think?
That's why a lot of unchurched people don't want to have anything to do with the church.
I agree.
I mean, let's be quite honest.
I agree.
You know, I think about some of the really hot topic kind of things that happen, and I'll just go ahead and mention it. You know, when John Gray bought his wife the Lamborghini.
Right.
Which he said came from him saving money from out of his own stuff.
Right.
And people were all upset about, you know, it within the church, but it got a lot of talk and press also outside of the church. And so, yes, we are being watched. We're being watched in every aspect of things that we do. But I think it's safe to say that money is among the top three things that, you know, the world is watching us handle.
So let me ask you this. Do you think it's okay for ministers to say, I don't care what people are saying. It's my money. I'm going to do whatever I want. Do you think that's okay? That's an okay position to take, even if it is their money? For example, you know, some ministers write books.
Right.
You know, they do several different things.
I believe that should not be said publicly.
So what do you think their response should be when they're coming after you for buying private jets and this and that and, you know, doing all these luxurious things, and they see that your church, you know, is down the street from a bunch of homeless people, or there's a bunch of homeless people that are on the street down from your church? Is it okay as a minister to say, it's my money, Jesus never wanted us to be poor, I'm just going to live my life? Is that the right response? Is that an okay response? Not the right. Is that an okay response?
I would say no, it's not an okay response. We do need to be more responsible because we are witnesses for Jesus. We're supposed to be representatives. And there are a lot of people who, like I said, will never be believers because of what they have seen people in the church do.
Right.
And one of the things that is actually a saying attributed to Gandhi, the Indian pacifist that MLK took a lot of, you know, the way he did things from. Some people say that Gandhi said, I like your Christ, but I don't like your Christians, or something to that effect. I actually read his autobiography. He did not say that. Someone else said it, but I can see why it is attributed to him. He encountered a lot of Christians that were very dishonest, and they were dishonest in money. And so his thought was, and their response to him whenever he asked them about it was similar to what you were saying. It's kind of like, well, God forgives us for doing things, and hey, in this particular issue, this is my stuff, so, you shouldn't worry about it kind of stuff. And so Gandhi was of the perspective, like, if Christianity and following Jesus does not make you a better person, then why should you follow him at all?
Right.
So we do need to be very careful about what we do and how we do it, because can you imagine how different the world would look if Gandhi had become a Christian, because he was so influential over the entire country of India in his time. So, and I'm not saying that there aren't Indian Christians or anything. I'm just, there are many different religions in India. And so it just makes me wonder if he had seen a better example of a Christian walking out their faith, wow, what could have been done in that particular country? How much different would that country look today, I wonder. So, no, I don't think it's a good response. I think we all need to be very cognizant of how we do things, when we do things. Brought up in another podcast saying just because we know that it's good for us doesn't mean, or it's okay for us to do something, it does not mean that we should do it. And that goes back to, that passage but when Paul was talking about should you eat meat from sacrificed idols. So, Bammy, where do we go from here? I mean, where do we go from here?
Yeah, for me, again, I think this conversation is less difficult if we spend more time teaching people about just committing your heart to God. I think that is the foundation. When the more of my heart God has, the easier it is for me to give not only of my money but my time and my talent. Right? Sometimes we have these conversations about giving to God, and it's all about the money. Well, it's not. That's not all.
It's also the gifting that he has put within us and things of that nature. Yes. Absolutely.
So for me, that would be my recommendation, is that we spend more time talking to people about just surrendering their hearts and their lives to God. The giving will come. Now, the challenge for a lot of ministers is going to be, do you have the faith, right? We're talking about people having faith. Do you have the faith that is enough?
And for me, okay, you're taught it. However, I think you still need to go further and make sure that you exercise your relationship with God, and that you continue to learn and pray about it and learn to be able to hear from him about this, because a preacher can teach you to give your heart to God all he wants to, but if you don't grow from that point, you'll still be stuck.
Yeah, and I also encourage people to not be gullible. There are people who are gullible and just kind of take whatever the preacher says. That's not good enough. I
wouldn't call it gullible. I would just say that they just trust. Okay. Trust God, not man.
I think that's a good place for us to wrap this up. This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation. Hope people are able to benefit from this. So we want to hear from you, our listeners. What is your experience with money and the church? Talk to us. We'd like to hear, get some feedback from you, see what you've seen, how it's affected you, where you are in your faith with giving. We'd like to hear back from you.
All right. And so with that, we hope to sit with you on next week as we do another podcast episode. Every Wednesday, you can get us at our website, or you can get us through most of the different podcast populations, but just go to our website. You can go to our social media, which would be 46Conversations on all platforms, and find out more information.
Absolutely. So until next time, we are out.
We're out of here. See you next Wednesday.